facing a problem at this moment. There is, I'm happy to say, a religion of peace in this world, but it's not Islam. Okay. To call Islam a religion of peace, as we hear ceaselessly reiterated, is completely delusional. Now, Jainism actually is a religion of peace. Jainism is the core principle of Jainism is nonviolence. Gandhi got his nonviolence from the Jains. The crazier you get as a Jain, the less we have to worry about you. It is. Jain extremists are actually they are paralyzed by their pacifism. Jain extremists they can't take their eyes off the ground when they walk lest they step on an ant. They filter every sip of water through cheesecloth lest they swallow and thereby kill a bug. So the problem, notice, the problem is not religious extremism, okay, because extremism is not a problem if your core beliefs are truly nonviolent. The problem isn't fundamentalism, okay, which we often hear this said. These are euphemisms. I mean, the only problem with Islamic fundamentalism are the fundamentals of Islam. Now, we have Mullah Omar and Osama bin Laden and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. These guys agree about the nature of reality and how to live within it. And the problem is they are giving a very plausible version of the faith. Osama bin Laden is not the Reverend Jim Jones of the Muslim world. It would be wonderful if he were, but the problem is he is giving a truly straightforward version of Islam, and you really have to be an acrobat to figure out how he's distorting the faith. Now, if these guys were Jains, or Buddhists, or Amish, or Quakers, it would be patently obvious how they were distorting their religion. I mean, in fact, their behavior would be unintelligible. Okay, it is not obvious by the light of Islam, and this is just a fact we have to speak honestly about. That we need to cease to reward people for pretending to know things they do not know. And the only area of discourse where we do this is on the subject of God. And the reasons are not so numerous. It turns out there's not 100 ways or reasons to rise to the defense of God. There really are only 3. Either you argue that a specific religion is true, or you argue religion is useful in general, or you argue that atheism is intolerant or in bad taste or corrosive of something that's important in human life. And it's interesting that people rarely argue for the truth of religion. Even fundamentalists, I find. Fundamentalists almost never come forward with evidence for miracles or the confirmation of biblical prophecy. Some do, but for the most part, that's not even their primary concern. Rather, it's the usefulness of religion, especially as a framework in which to think about morality, that people are willing to advocate for, and the commensurate danger of atheism, that atheism is somehow corrosive of morality. Now, the first thing to notice is that as an argument for belief in God, that is not only a bad argument, that's actually a non sequitur. I mean, religion could be useful, but completely empty of content. It could function like a placebo. And beliefs, really, you can't believe something or shouldn't be able to believe something merely based on its utility. Beliefs are not like clothing. You can't adopt them on the basis of comfort or utility. But people of faith, really to a man, are worried that unless we have a universal moral framework, unless we have a sense that words like good and evil and right and wrong actually mean something, then humanity will lose its way. And I actually share that fear. And I should point out that not all atheists do, but I do. And I want to tell you when this concern was first seared onto my brain. I was at a meeting at the Salk Institute. I believe it might have been one that Richard was at as well. And I gave a talk about morality, and I argued, as I will here tonight, that morality must relate at some level to questions of human and animal well-being. And the moment we admit this, we can see that certain moral codes are in fact worse than others. And I cited as an example the misogyny and sadism of the Taliban as an example of an orientation that was obviously less good than others. And at the end, another invited speaker approached me and said, how could you ever say, from the point of view of science, that forcing women to wear burqas is wrong? And I said, well, because the moment you admit right and wrong has something to do with human well-being, then it's obvious that forcing half the population to live in cloth bags and beating them or killing them when they try to get out is not a good way of maximizing it. And she said, well, that's just your opinion. And I said, okay, well, let's make it easier. Let's say we found a culture that was removing the eyeballs of children, every third child, say. Would you then agree that we'd found a culture that was not perfectly maximizing human well-being? And she said, well, it would depend on why they were doing it. So after my eyebrows returned from the back of my head, I said, okay, let's say they're doing it for religious reasons. Let's say they have a scripture which says every third should walk in darkness or some such nonsense. And she said, well, then you could never say that they were wrong. Now, you should know that I was speaking to a woman who was quite a sophisticated student of philosophy and science. In fact, she has since been appointed to the President's Council on Bioethics in the United States. She's one of 13 people advising President Obama on all of the ethical implications of medicine and progress in related science and technology. And she had just delivered a perfectly lucid lecture on the moral implications of advances in neuroscience, and she was especially concerned that we might be subjecting captured terrorists to fMRI-based lie detection technology. And she thought this would be a truly unconscionable violation of their cognitive liberty. So on the one hand, her moral scruples were really finely calibrated to recoil from the slightest perceived misstep in our war on terror, and yet she was totally detached from the very real suffering of millions of women in Afghanistan at this moment. So I view this double standard as a problem. And strangely, this is the erosion of basic common sense and moral goodness that religious people tend to be worried about. I would challenge anyone here to think of a question upon which we once had a scientific answer, however inadequate, but for which now the best answer is a religious one. Now you can think of an uncountable number of questions that run the other way, where we once had a religious answer, and now the authority of religion has been battered and nullified by science and by moral progress and secular progress generally. And I think that's not an accident. And the one area where religion still seems to hold its ground is now under assault by science, and it's very good that it is under assault by science. And this is the whole issue of morality and human happiness and what constitutes the good life. These are, and let me just tell you why I think this is a scientific question. Even the place of science is ultimately a scientific question. Because surely there are objective facts to be learned about the basis of human happiness. The moment you recognize that morality and spirituality and value is a matter of happiness and suffering, and that we're moving suffering in the direction of happiness, then you realize that if there are objective facts to know about human happiness, and surely there are, facts about the way that genes and ideas and uses of attention and economic systems, social structures, all of these conspire to make us happy or miserable. And again, it's true that scientific discourse is just in the beginning of addressing these issues. But it's not too soon to say that love is better than hate, in terms of ethics. And we are studying these things at the level of the brain. Eventually we will understand the brain basis of love and hate and the kinds of mechanisms, both cultural and personal, that ramify these states of mind. And there will be right and wrong answers, and we'll find, for instance, that honor killing is a bad strategy if you want to raise compassionate men. We know that already, but at some point we will know this biochemically.